Smith. I'm a contributor at The Atlantic. I'm a senior advisor at Emerson Collective, and I'm excited to welcome you to The Atlantic Reads. Today's CNN anchor and chief Washington correspondent Jake Tapper will discuss his third novel, All the Demons Are Here, a thriller set in 1977. The protagonists from his first two novels, the Martyr family, return in this one, and the storyline touches on everything from the rise of tabloid journalism to the cult of Evel Knievel. A bit of housekeeping before we begin. Please silence your cell phones, but keep them handy. If something you see today or you hear today captures your attention, we encourage you to share it with your social networks. Please use the hashtag TAF23. And now please welcome Jake Tapper, along with the Atlantic staff writer leading the conversation, Helen Lewis.
Hello and welcome. It's very nice to see so many of you here. And as I said, we're going to talk a bit about Jake's book to start off with, and then we'll have a bit more of a free-flowing conversation, because I don't know if you've noticed, Jake, that it's quite an interesting time in politics.
Lots going on. Lots going on.
But let's start.
I heard, by the way, the House Republicans finally passed something. Is that right? Yeah.
Well, good.
It won't pass the Senate, and it won't solve the problem. but they did pass something.
Well, let's go back, first of all, to 1977, where this book begins. It's a third in a trilogy, so you took us from the McCarthy era through Watergate and now to 77. What was it about the late 70s that made you want to set this book?
Originally, I did not want to touch the 70s because I actually lived through them, and I did not remember them as being particularly fun. But I was little, so maybe my perception was a little skewed, given the limits of what I was allowed to do or interested in doing. Some folks who were a little bit older told me I was reading them wrong, that the 70s were actually a much wilder and more interesting time than my experience. And I researched the period, and these folks were right. They were actually one of the weirdest times in American history. And I picked 1977 because it was a year when so many strange things were happening in that one year. So many extraordinary moments, from Studio 54 opening, to the New York City blackout, to Elvis dying, to Jimmy Carter being inaugurated, to UFO sightings, to the debate over this fake cancer cure called Laetrile, to Evel Knievel literally jumping over sharks like 8 months before Fonz did it. And it was just one after the other after the other. And it felt like a good time. For the first two books starred Charlie and Margaret, the main protagonists, and this felt like a good time, a good period to set their kids, Ike and Lucy, who are now in their 20s, as the main protagonists. Ike is an AWOL Marine, very disillusioned. He's on the pit crew of Evel Knievel in Montana, and Lucy is an aspiring journalist inspired by Woodward and Bernstein, who gets hired by a Rupert Murdoch-esque publisher who is starting a tabloid in DC. Oh, I forgot. 1977 was also the Summer of Sam, where the Son of Sam serial killer is in New York City, stalking innocent people, murdering them. And it is the moment that tabloid journalism really takes hold in America. And Rupert Murdoch really gets his power starts. And we haven't heard much from him since, of course. So.
Well, let's stay on the character of Lucy Marder, because I personally love a novel where a journalist is the hero. I think there should be more of them, frankly.
A young female journalist at that, yeah.
Exactly. But she, as you say, joins a tabloid. It's a time when in the UK you've got the foundation of the Sun newspaper, and in the US similar things are happening. A new style of tabloid journalism, yellow journalism, is really taking hold. And how much of what we saw then in the 70s are we still feeling the repercussions of now?
A lot. I mean, one of the reasons I write historical fiction is because, they say history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so you can go back and see things, whether it's Joe McCarthy lying, being obscene, saying horrible things, and everybody in his party, with a couple exceptions, being afraid to criticize him, or the misogyny underneath the seeming charm of the Rat Pack, or the rise of tabloid journalism, and you can hear a lot of rhyming today. So what Lucy, Margaret's the mom, what Lucy has to deal with is she is on the trail of a serial killer in D.C., one of the bodies shows up like right over there. That doesn't spoil anything, don't worry. And she hands in the copy, and her editors goose it a little bit for the Wood, which is what you call for a tabloid newspaper as opposed to a broadsheet. For like the New York Post, the most famous one is Headless Body and Topless Bar. And they want newsstand sales. They're trying to compete. And we see this not just with the New York Post and with Fox. We see this everywhere. You might call it clickbait. You might call it, whatever you call it, the lower thirds on TV, trying to get viewers.
Yeah.
And it's with us in all journalism today, even The Economist, even National Geographic, even The Atlantic, even CNN. We're all trying to get viewers, and we're all trying to do so in a responsible way, but we want the most compelling lead, et cetera. And we want to do it in a way that has journalistic integrity, but we also want to do it in a way that's competitive. And so Lucy is wrestling with this because her bosses are twisting it and taking things that are true and adding things that feel true but aren't necessarily. And she wants to succeed. She wants to become a journalistic star. She wants to be like Woodward and Bernstein, who are also characters in the book, which was fun to write because I know them both a little bit, as probably many of you do as well. And it was fun to do the 70s version of them. Bernstein with his feathered hair, like Farrah Fawcett, and so that's a scenario that we find ourselves in today. Now, in the book, the publishers, Max Lyon is the publisher. He's based directly on Rupert Murdoch. He not only plays with sensationalizing Lucy's reporting, he dives into racism and trying to appeal to lowest common denominator politics. And that's something we definitely see in, for instance, how Fox covers the immigration debate or, caravans or crime, et cetera, et cetera.
One of the things I also appreciate about this book is that all the most evil people in it are British. Thank you. But you do, as you say, riff off the idea of the kind of Succession-style dynasty of the Murdochs. And
well, I didn't rip off Succession. We both ripped off the Murdochs.
I said riff. Don't worry. I'm not making accusations.
Riffed. I'm sorry. Riffed. Yes.
But I think that is really interesting because we're talking in the shadow of only a week ago that at the young age of 92, Rupert Murdoch has decided to become chairman emeritus. He's ascending to a sort of higher plane.
Yes.
Do you think that will change the way that the next election is covered? Or is that now such a juggernaut of the New York Post and Fox and his properties that they will just carry on the way that they were?
I think it will change. I think it will get worse. Yeah. Lachlan seems to be a worse version of his father. And so, yes, that's my basic... Because at least Rupert Murdoch was behind the scenes every now and then saying something that seemed sensible,
right,
even
and
if it was...
has the Times, which in British terms is a kind of centre-right newspaper.
Right, perfectly respectable newspaper.
Yeah.
No, Lachlan seems to not be encumbered with that sense of sensibility.
There's another line I really liked in it, which Margaret says about the idea of writing a book about Elvis, and his bodyguards writing a book about him. And she says, you have to think about whether or not when you're writing these things, are you reporting on something or do you kind of become the story? Right,
so this is based on an actual book that was published by Murdoch in 1977, based on interviews with two former members of Elvis's entourage, two former bodyguards of Elvis's. And this is a real book. It's called Elvis, What Happened? And it basically was an expose of Elvis Presley and how many amphetamines and how much drugs he was doing and his personal behavior. It was written by Steve Dunleavy. I don't know how many of you remember Steve Dunleavy. He went on to do A Current Affair. He was an Australian, I think, so I don't think you have to take the blame for him.
I don't take responsibility for the Australians.
I like how I hold you responsible. Well, you did it yourself. You take responsibility for all Brits.
Yep.
Anyway, and it was, there is a theory that this book drove Elvis Presley into a tailspin that resulted in him dying. So there is a theory that, now I should also say, there is nothing in the book that seems to be untrue.
Yeah.
So that differentiates it from other works of the Murdoch oeuvre in that sense. Like, it seems to be accurate.
But this must be something that you wrestle with. I think it's something that journalism has seen in the last 10 years particularly, is candidates who run against the media, candidates who talk constantly about the lying MSM, and, and they try and make individual representatives of journalism into kind of boogeymen for their...
Right.
How has that changed the way that you do your job?
It can't really, except that probably the only way it affects me doing my job is probably I cover news media less than I would, because I am perceived to be a player in that world, and so it might sound more as if I have a bias, or I'm on the chessboard, so you shouldn't trust me. That's a horrible metaphor, but like, whatever, that I'm playing a role here.
Yeah.
And like, so, if somebody wants to do, like, for instance, right now, a big story in the media world is how much people at Fox are bashing the Fox Business News debate, and specifically going after one of the moderators, who I think was from Univision, right? Univision, I believe, and going after her for asking actual questions at the debate. And I'm not sure if we're going to cover that. If we cover it, I'm going to let the reporter do, I'm just going to say just the facts and let the reporter do it, because I don't want people to think I'm doing that for competitive reasons. That's probably the only way I see it affecting me. I can't let it affect how I cover politicians.
Yeah.
I can't let them game the system like that. That's just not fair.
Right, because one of the things that I've been thinking will be a big challenge for the mainstream media is covering Joe Biden's age, right? We've already seen some stories about the fact he's got special shoes and he's doing balance exercises, maybe his schedule's being restricted. And it feels to me that that may play the role in the kind of mythology of the right and the case against re-electing him that Hillary Clinton's emails played in 2016. And there will be constant demands of, why aren't you covering this? Why are you covering up? Why aren't you doing this? And I wonder if do you just completely tune that stuff out?
Well, here's the thing. I think it's all about proportion, right? It's not, look, if you don't think the Hillary email story is even, it's not that the Hillary email story was not a story. I think it's a question of whether you put it on the cover of the New York Times. I mean, that seems to be
right.
the real...
And the same with Hunter Biden's laptop, right? There's these kind of mythological, they attain an incredibly big status, and it's trying to keep that in proportion.
Are you trying to make it comparable? There's a proportionality to it that I think is important for people to keep in mind. But it's not as though a Secretary of State and classified information is empirically not a story. It is. There was an FBI investigation, and I mean, that played a role in her campaign, and then it was closed, the investigation, and then it was reopened. And, it did play a role in the campaign. I hear the people that say there was a question about proportionality, and I agree. I don't think that I made that mistake, but I do think that some in the media made that mistake. And I think the same is true for Joe Biden's age. I think it is a legitimate issue, and if you look at the concerns of the American people, including a majority of Democrats, they are concerned about that issue. But it is certainly nothing compared to 4 criminal indictments and 91 counts, and to say nothing of recent civil suits having to do with fraud, et cetera. So, I think we just have to keep our eyes on the ball, and as we do every day, decide proportionality. When that's one of the things we do when we decide what's on the cover of the Atlantic, what leads our show on the lead, is like proportionality. What's most important, and how do we cover it?
And the other characters, so there's Lucy and then also Ike, as you say, is an AWOL Marine. And he represented to me, I don't know how you saw it, a kind of generational loss of trust. From
100%.
A generation
Yeah.
who fought in the Second World War, which was a service that they felt proud of, they felt they were liberators, they felt they'd stood up against tyranny, to Vietnam and Korea, a much more complicated role for America in being the world's policeman or having an effect overseas. And was that something when you were writing it, you thought, this is a character that I want to explore, that loss of trust, that loss of innocence, I guess it almost feels like?
Yes, you read that exactly right. Ike represents disillusionment. 1977 is a period of disillusionment for the American people. It's post-Watergate, it's post-Vietnam War. Ike is raised in a household by, I don't know how many of you read the first two books, but the main characters in the first two books are Charlie Martyr, who's a World War II hero and like a Rockefeller Republican from New York, and his loving wife, Margaret, who is a zoologist and a strong, independent woman. And so the kids are raised in this household where they're taught to believe in America and the concept of America, and they're taught to, Ike is literally named after President Eisenhower, who was Charlie's general in World War II. And, even though the books, a lot of the themes of the books are like problems in the United States, they are ultimately taught to believe in family. The books always come to family at the end, and the positive parts of the United States, however flawed this nation is. But Ike is very disillusioned with the country, and that's another reason why I thought 1977 was a good year, because I do think that we are in a period like that in the United States right now. We're in a period of disillusionment, and we don't know what we stand for, and we don't know who to trust and who to believe. And obviously it's different now, because now it's more like we're going into tribes, as opposed to 1977. It was more just like a general mistrust and distrust. But yeah, I mean, I thought that's definitely something I feel. And I imbued both characters with different qualities. I put a lot of my skepticism into Ike, and I put my most annoying reporter traits into Lucy. Like, Lucy's the one who corrects your misuse of the word ironic, like, that kind of thing.
And Ike's love of tequila, or like love of biker
bourbon,
bars.
Ike drinks like I drank when I was in my 20s. Yes, sure.
I can't do that anymore. Another thing that really I felt was resonant, and I don't know what the period of writing this book came, is that Charlie Martyr, as a politician, is one who has taken a pretty brave stand that has actually ended up isolating him from his fellow Republicans. And as I was reading McKay Coppins' piece in The Atlantic, he's become Mitt Romney's biographer, that Mitt Romney has ended up fulfilling a pretty similar role to that, taken a principled decision, but that one that has been anti-political and has led him to experience those kind of consequences on a personal relationship level.
Yeah, so Charlie, in this book, so Charlie's like a Rockefeller Republican, which makes sense in 1954. And then 1962, the book is not hugely about politics. It's a bit about politics, but it's more about Hollywood. And in this book, it's 1977, and he's now a senator, because I was trying to figure out what his natural course would be. And I have him on the House Judiciary. I had him on the House Judiciary Committee, and he voted for the articles of impeachment against Nixon, because I figured that's what Charlie would do.
Right.
And he saw his colleague on the House Judiciary Committee, his fellow Republican, Larry Hogan Sr., vote the same way. And then but there's this mythology about how the Republican Party turned against Nixon. The Republican Party did not really turn against Nixon. Like, Larry Hogan Sr., after voting for the articles of impeachment against Nixon, went back to Maryland, tried to run statewide. I forget right now if it was Senate or governor, but he lost in the primary because they were mad at him for voting against Nixon. And that was the end of his political career. And Larry Hogan Jr., who was a two-term governor from Maryland, as you all know, his dad is his hero, because his dad did something like Liz Cheney did, which was gave up his career to take a position that he knew might do that. And even though in retrospect, it's like, oh, and then the Republican Party washed their hands of Nixon. I mean, bullshit. No, they didn't. I mean, some of them did, but remember, the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate. He was going to be impeached.
But what's interesting is, I guess it speaks to the fact that maybe people don't take the historical view. In that, I think if you are looking back and you voted to impeach Nixon, you probably feel better about it than if you kind of signed off on it, right?
Right.
And maybe you've already slightly answered this already, but why weren't there more at Mitt Romney's?
I don't know. I mean, it's like I mean, I looked into this in when I wrote the Hellfire Club, which takes place in 1954, and it takes place before Joe McCarthy is censured. But there's a lot of mythology about that too. The bravest person in that whole period was Margaret Chase Smith, who's this Republican woman from Maine, and she went after McCarthy in 1950. And Jack Anderson went after him in 1952, and Walt Kelly from Pogo, the comic strip, went after him in 1953. But Edward R. Murrow didn't go after McCarthy until 1954. And then finally the Senate did, then came the big moment, Have You No Shame, and Jack Welch, and that had to do with all this other stuff about,
Right.
McCarthy's protege, Roy Cohn. And then finally he got censured. But by the way, the Kennedys were not exactly cloaked in glory during any of this. So, I mean, yeah, the Republicans were behaving shamefully, but there were plenty of Democrats behaving shamefully as well. I don't know. I mean, like, generally speaking, looking for courage in this town is difficult.
It really struck me watching the Republican debates when the premise seemed to be, I'm better than Donald Trump, but not in a way I can tell you about. You just have to intuit it, right? Obviously, you should pick me instead of him, but he is great, though, isn't he?
Well, one of the big arguments that you hear on the stage is Donald Trump should not be the nominee because he can't win.
That was the Ron DeSantis pledge, was it right? Like,
Yeah,
I'm him, but electable.
He can't win. He's polarizing, not he's probably a criminal.
Right.
Or he led an insurrection and we all saw it happen with our own eyes, So, yeah, I don't know. I don't find it particularly difficult. But I have to say also, I don't, and I'm certainly exempting The Atlantic from this, and I'm not just saying this to be brown-nosy, it's true, but like, I don't look around a room of journalists and think like everybody here is saying the obvious facts about Donald Trump. I saw a headline in USA Today the other day that said something like, most Republican voters believe Donald Trump's claims of rigged elections. And it's just like, claims of rigged elections? You mean lies? You mean lies that the election was stolen? Because they're not claims of rigged elections. That's not what they are.
I find it quite hard to come over here from Britain, and just in the wake of my boss, Jeff Goldberg, having written his cover story with Mark Milley, and talking about the kind of, the fact that he feels that he had to kind of pull Donald Trump back from the brink several times. This is someone who could not have been closer to the center of what was happening, seeing somebody with very authoritarian instincts. And the response to that was for Trump to go on Truth Social and say, in the good old days, he would have been executed for that.
Right.
And that passed with barely a whisper. And I thought that was extraordinary to me, the level to which that kind of invocation of political violence is now not even comment-worthy in America now.
Well, I led my show with it the next day, but
you are an exception.
But yes,
but yeah.
I mean, I agree, but it's not just right. But it's not.
But did you not think, why isn't everybody? Have I gone mad? Did that happen?
It's not, my point is, it's not just the Republican Party.
Right.
It's also news media that is either so numb to it, or I fear, so afraid of alienating viewers that they're pretending not to see it. So afraid of stating that is stating the facts about Donald Trump, because they are now perceived as, those facts are perceived as demonstrating a liberal bias.
Yeah.
That they are unwilling to do so. And that, to me, is a great fear I have about the news media today, because I see it happening. I do not see it happening at CNN, but I see it happening, and it worries me a great deal.
It is something that worries me too coming into 2024. But on a happy note, we have to talk about Evel Knievel.
Yes.
Because I get the sense you slightly love Evel Knievel for
I do
all
now.
of his faults.
I love to hate him.
Right.
So, the true story about
big Evel Knievel haters.
They hate Evel Knievel.
Yeah.
They hate Evel Knievel. The true story about Evel Knievel, so this is name droppy, all right? So
I'm braced.
I was at a fishing lodge with Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel has decorated his fishing lodge with all this Evel Knievel stuff. And he knew I was going to do my next novel in the 70s. And I'm like, what is the deal? Evel Knievel's charm completely eluded me as a kid. Other friends of mine had the lunchbox, the toy that would jump over the stuff. I was in a PBS house. I was not in an ABC Wide World of Sports house. So I did not get it. But Jimmy was like, you gotta know about Evel Knievel. He should be in your book.
Yeah.
So this is definitely the first novel for which Jimmy Kimmel was a muse. I think it's fair to say. Perhaps. So anyway, he told me to watch this documentary called Being Evil that Johnny Knoxville helped produce, and it was great. It's really good. And then I started reading about him, and he is this archetype, this American figure that is, and this is not meant in a pejorative way, that is kind of Trumpian in his salesmanship and showmanship and his ability just to like create something out of just charisma and bombast.
Right, you have this like, Evel had celebrity wealth and a big mouth, and all of that could probably get you to the White House.
Yeah, so in 1972, the Butte Chamber of Commerce ran Evel Knievel for president as a joke. So I have an Evel for president button from that era, which is a joke. But in my novel, I have him run for president as a stunt to get attention, but it becomes a bigger thing like that with a caravan of people on motorcycles mainly going east, and it becomes a little darker and more sinister. But it allowed me to play with the idea of why do people follow a demagogue?
Right.
And he has this trail of people with grievances. Some of them are people with very real grievances. Some of them are people with very fake grievances, very incorrect grievances. But that was something that obviously we've all probably been thinking about to one degree or another since January 6th. And it was something I wanted to explore through fiction.
And how much of so he leads a rally of people to Graceland initially around the death of Elvis. Did that happen?
That did not happen.
That did not happen. That is your invention.
Yeah, so I had Evel Knievel, they're on the road when they find out Elvis died, or they're not on the road, but they're in the wilderness when they find out Elvis died. And then they go to Graceland, and then the caravan keeps going east to Washington, D.C. And then Evel Knievel gives this impassioned speech about Elvis Presley, but no, that's all made up.
The other thing that I think you do that I really liked was the twisting between the kind of people who are really into UFOs, which is a subject that has come back recently with some of the Pentagon reports, and the kind of survivalist communities. But you weave into that the story of Agent Orange and of people who are deeply affected by kind of military cover-ups. And that must be, again, something that you really struggle with, I don't know, in covering politics, is that conspiracies do exist.
Yes.
And conspiracy theories also are a huge part of our politics right now.
100%.
How do you navigate that? Talking about the things that, because the US government has participated in some very large-scale bad things.
Yeah, and in 1977, the U.S. government is still denying that Agent Orange had any effect on soldiers. And I have in the book, so actually, I wrote this book about Afghanistan called The Outpost, a true story about the existence of this outpost. And the lieutenant governor of Delaware was so moved by the book, he had me and a bunch of the soldiers from the outpost come. It was a very nice event. And while I was there, I forget if it was him or somebody else, but somebody told me about a bunch of veterans living in the woods in Delaware because they just could not reacclimate to American society. And I could not find out anything more about that to report on in a real way. But that inspired me to have this group of veterans living in the woods in this book. And there are other tribes of people, UFO supporters, because 1977 was a period where like everybody was seeing UFOs. Jimmy Carter claimed to have seen UFOs as governor. That's a true story.
Look it up. Hang on a minute. What kind of UFO did Jimmy Carter think he'd seen?
I forget, but he filed reports. This is a true story. Look it up. You can Google it. Like as governor, he claimed he saw UFOs. Like everybody was seeing UFOs in the 1970s. And there's a little inner monologue Ike has talking about this when he talks about, like, well, why wouldn't the government lie about this? They lie about everything else,
Yeah.
you know? And that's me at my most cynical and skeptical. That's me, what I think.
Right, and I think about this weirdly at the end of the 19th century when forces like radiation were being discovered,
Yes.
right? That actually the idea there was an invisible force that was deadly then turned out to be true. So
Yeah.
you can see why people became, at that time, really interested in mediumship and seances, because one invisible force was real, and then there were a lot of ones that turned out not to be. And I feel like we're maybe living through something similar now.
Well, the burn pits, right? The burn pits, like everybody, like you're not allowed to, you know, burn just all this industrial waste in the United States near where people live, or even just anywhere, I don't think. But like once U.S. soldiers go anywhere else, they put them right next to the camps, and all these Americans, veterans come back and they're like dying from it. And for a while, the U.S. military was like, well, you can't prove that that had anything to do with the burn pits. Now, thankfully, because of activism of survivors and some good actions by some good members of Congress and Dennis McDonough, the VA secretary, that's changing. John Stewart did a lot of good work on this too. But that was in my mind a lot too. So what we have, I combined in the book these veterans who are dying of cancer because of Agent Orange, although they don't even know that that's what it is, and Laetrile, which was this quackery. I mean, just because these were things going on at the time.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I really felt over the pandemic where there was a huge resurgence in anti-vaccine sentiment that I think the news media had to change how it approached those causes. It couldn't presume to just issue a tablet of stone saying, of course vaccines are safe, because there were so many people for whom they just were not ready to take anything on trust from the media, right? We had to do more explaining to people. We had to be more kind of humble, I guess, about
But this Laetrile thing, so Laetrile was this fake cure for cancer in the 1970s and 80s that was like, it was like basically like cyanide pills from apricot pits that people were selling as an alternate cure for cancer. And it didn't work, and the CDC and the NIH were saying it doesn't work, but people were begging for it. And look, they were desperate people who they and their loved ones were dying of cancer, and either they didn't trust chemotherapy or it wasn't working. And remember, this is the 70s. You know, modern therapies are much better now than they were in the 1970s. And there was this huge movement in Congress and in the states to let people try this. And this was something else that was fascinating when I went back and did the research for this, which is just like the mistrust of the CDC and the NIH, the belief that these scientists would keep from the American people what is a clearly proven scientific cure for cancer, was deep in the culture.
Yeah.
And it was not true. And it was the results were often tragic. There was this family in Massachusetts, and I heard about this in this great podcast from Slate that coincidentally did 1977. They have a podcast called like either Year One or 1 Year, I forget. Right. But Josh Levin did 1977 at the same time I was writing my book, and I totally learned about Laetrile and was inspired to put it in the book from Josh. Don't worry, I gave him credit in the book. And there was a family called, I think there was the Green family in the book, in real life, I mean. And in my book, it's the White family, but in real life, it was the Green family. And there was this whole thing about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, like taking their kid from them and them getting the kid back, and then they take the kid and they flee to Mexico and they treat him with Laetrile, and tragically the boy dies. Steve McQueen, the great actor, had cancer. He went to Mexico, tried to cure his cancer with Laetrile. He died. It doesn't work. I wish it did.
Right.
I mean, it's a much better story. The government is covering up something that works because they're in the pocket of big pharma. That's a much better story.
Right.
It's just not true.
And I think in a way it's strangely comforting, right? I think the idea of conspiracy theories is comforting because someone's in charge. The government is so competent that
And there's a cure for cancer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so everything will be okay if only you can get to the person who's kind of keeping it from you. But did that research affect, perhaps, I mean, there was a couple of months ago, there was a massive surge of interest in Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been a long-time anti-vaccine activist, a 9/11 truther, various other fringe beliefs. But he was absolutely everywhere for one weekend, all over the media. What did your experience of having researched Laetrile teach you about how to cover him?
Well, I had an experience with him in 2005 that was very informative in terms of how to cover him, which is to not cover him. He is incredibly ill-informed.
And he twisted your interview, didn't he?
He claimed on Jordan Peterson's podcast or whatever it is, YouTube show, that I had worked with him intensely for 3 weeks on an excellent documentary about how childhood vaccines cause autism, and then it was killed by ABC News. This is when I worked at ABC News. That was his claim. That is not what happened. He had done a story for Rolling Stone and Salon.com, and both of whom have retracted and vanished that story. Salon explained why they did it. Rolling Stone just poofed it. And I did a story for ABC News about his story. I never met him. We sent a camera crew, and I did like a telephone interview. And with the advice of Dr. Timothy Johnson, who was chief of our medical unit, we held the story a day and did a little bit more research. And got input from the CDC, like people he was making claims about. We went to them.
Yeah.
It's called reporting. And the piece ran the next day, so he would make a claim about like the CDC or an NIH advisory board or whatever. And I wrote about this for CNN.com, so if you want the details that are accurate, I'm not giving them right now, but it's on CNN.com. And, and then what he has said since about that experience is just not factual. It wasn't killed, it aired.
Yeah.
It wasn't a documentary, it was like a minute-half, 2-minute piece. I never met him, we didn't work intensely. Other than that, everything he said is true.
Right, you got your name right.
And just like, I don't even know if he knows he's lying, like that's the degree to which, but he says so many false things. Like the experience I had with him and that Rolling Stone Salon.com story says to me, like I don't even know if he wrote that story or if he had like college kids writing it for him or whatever, but like he is dangerously ill-informed. And what he says about childhood vaccines is so, like he convinces people to not get their kids vaccinated, and then the risk that those kids will then die of measles or mumps or rubella is real.
Yeah. And
it literally happened in American Samoa. And you can Google it and find out more. So.
It is interesting though, because I think The Atlantic had a similar experience with Vivek Ramaswamy, and my colleague John Hendrickson interviewed him. He made some, I don't know how to describe them, some very strange remarks about 9/11.
And he denied saying them, and he had a tape of it.
Right, and I thought that was a very interesting example. I wasn't privy to those discussions, being based in London mostly, but The Atlantic was ready to put the tape out. And I think that is something that perhaps the journalistic media has learned, is the fact that you have to be able to show your workings. You have to do everything. You have to operate in the assumption that, operatives might be following you around, that people might be, there is no such thing as a private off-the-record email. All of this stuff is now fair game. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to give you some quick-fire questions.
Sure.
Okay. What lessons from 2016 and 2020 covering the elections will you be taking into 2024?
Be very careful about running any campaign event live, especially from somebody who has shown a propensity for lying and saying things that put other people in danger.
That was good. What political stories aren't getting enough attention? What should we as citizens...
The opioid crisis, the fentanyl crisis are definitely not getting enough attention. The mental health crisis is not getting enough attention. Those three come to mind immediately.
How much will the Dobbs decision affect voting in the next election?
I think the Dobbs decision will have a huge impact. I don't know that it will be pollable or quantifiable until people actually vote. But I think that the degree to, first of all, I think that this is going to be something that we're not going to know about until election morning or election day, because I think it's something that the Biden people know is one of their biggest assets. Is this is the first like. I see some young faces here. It used to be just kind of it used to be just kind of a nudge, nudge, wink, wink by Republicans. Don't worry, Roe v. Wade is never going to be overturned. This is all just a bunch of Democratic, nonsense and campaign rhetoric.
Right, David Frum described the Republicans on this as kind of the dog that caught the car, right?
Yes,
we campaign constantly
100%.
on it. Oh God, we've actually done it.
Laura Bush in 2004 went on, I think, the Today Show and kind of suggested that maybe she was pro-choice. I don't know if people remember that. And by the way, the anti-abortion community in the Republican Party was they were hearing this too, and they were like, what the hell? This is not acceptable. And this is the first presidential election where it's okay, we were serious,
Yeah.
either side, either side, either the side wanting to ban abortion or the side warning that the other side was going to ban abortion. Now it's real. Now it's real, so we'll see what happens. But based on all the elections we've seen in Kansas and Ohio, and it would seem that it is something that will help Democrats in many places.
Which do you think will be the most interesting state to watch in the next 18 months?
Interesting. I define interesting as different from pivotal.
Right.
Pivotal is Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, period. Interesting will be Arizona and Georgia.
Okay.
But pivotal are the three.
Yeah.
The three, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
We talk a lot about old politicians, but who under, let's say, 45, a spring chicken in American political terms, who are interesting? Who will shape the future of American politics for the next couple of decades, do you think, about that cohort?
Oh, God. I don't know. There are a lot, it will be interesting to see what happens post-Trump, whether that is, 2025 or 2029 or whatever the math is. I'm not good at math. But it will be interesting to see what happens to the people in the Republican Party who have this kind of populist side to them now. There are shades of that in, every now and then you'll see Rubio or J.D. Vance saying things that sound like they sounded almost when it comes to the UAW strike or when it comes to that horrible train wreck in East Palestine. I don't want to give anybody too much credit or anything. I'm just saying, you hear them sounding like more than just the traditional Republican Party line, and I think that might be interesting. But I don't think any of that. I think Donald Trump casts such a tremendous shadow on his party. It's tough to see how those flowers bloom.
Okay,
if you pardon the metaphor.
One final one, which is there a fourth book? Are you going to do the 80s? Will someone have a perm?
Right now, there are a couple nonfiction books I want to write. I do have an idea for a fourth book that takes place in the 80s, and I started it, but then there are a couple nonfiction books that I'm really interested in, and the truth of the matter is fiction is really tough. Nonfiction is actually a little easier. Because
I don't want to hear this, but okay.
But it is. Nonfiction's a little easier, which is not to say it's easy, but it's a little easier just because you don't have to make anything up. It's a lot of work because you have to interview people and you have to get records and you have to, but the part of your brain that actually just has to invent things, you can put that up, which is that's a muscle that's difficult, and unless you're exercising it all the time, Michael Connolly or whatever, it's difficult to exercise. So. Yes, there is an 80s version with perms and jazzercise, but not for a few years.
Well, look, it's been a pleasure talking to you. This is available in all good and bad bookshops, I should say. But please, give a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks again to Jake and Helen for that terrific conversation. If you want to purchase a copy of Jake's book, All the Demons Are Here, please visit our bookstore partner, Politics and Prose, at 610 Water Street near registration. Thanks to everybody for joining us, but we have a lot more lined up for you today. In a few minutes at 1:30 on this stage, former Congressman from Texas and 2024 Republican presidential candidate Will Hurd and I will talk about his campaign, the future of the Republican Party, and the fragility of our democracy. And then right after that, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will join Atlantic Editor-in-Chief Jeffrey Goldberg to discuss the Biden administration's strategy to address domestic and global political violence and the way that that poses an existential threat to the future of democracy. Do a little business on behalf of The Atlantic, which I love. If you're interested in exploring more of The Atlantic, we ask that you support our journalism by becoming a subscriber. Visit theatlantic.com for subscription options. Never more important than right now that we support public service journalism. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. We'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks very much.